I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been broken.
Good afternoon, good evening. This is Dove Tusman. You're back on equal footing. I'm going to apologize right away. Many of our listeners know there's a storm going on in the northeastern U.S. now, and we're on live, and sometimes we have hiccups as a result. Tonight, I'm not in studio yet. I am literally on the way to the studio in Brooklyn, so bear with us if we've got a little audio difficulty at the beginning. This is a special show tonight, very close to my heart. I am, as you know, Latino. I'm a Jew as well. We've talked the last couple of weeks about the change in the Jewish vote. Post-election, there's been a lot of debate around that. Did it change? Was there a realignment? Did it affect the outcome in Pennsylvania? We've heard from folks like Hank Scheinkauf and Yerucham Silber and other active scholars of the Jewish vote. The results are kind of mixed. On the one hand, in this last election, arguably you had as many or more Jewish American votes to the Democratic Party than you've had in decades. But on the other hand, you had a significant movement that's been going on for a long time amongst the observant or Orthodox vote moving towards the GOP. However, at the same time, that vote tends to be strongest in places that kind of don't matter when it comes to the presidential electoral college, like New York and Florida, because it's not going to move the needle. I'll tell you what does move the needle and is going to continue to move the needle even more over coming generations is the Latino vote. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, let me give you a couple of headlines here. The Latino vote as a whole has been strongly Democratic forever. And here's an interesting factoid to give you a sense of the importance of the Latino vote and the importance in a number of swing states. For the first time ever in this presidential election, there were more registered Latino voters than registered black voters in the United States. Just over 35 million registered Latino voters, just over 34 million registered black voters. First time. So it is the single largest ethnic segment in the United States. Little bit of a spoiler alert. Is it actually an ethnic segment? Not so sure. Definitely doesn't vote as a bloc. And that's part of the problem. The predictions around the Latino vote have been consistently wrong over the last several elections. This time, the GOP lost, but that's predictable, lost the Latino vote, but not by much. Trump got 43% of the Latino vote. He got over 50%, 56% of Latino men. Even Latino women went from 30% voting for Biden in 2020 to 38% voting for Trump in 2024. Here's the math in U.S. elections. Let's put aside for the moment the House of Representatives. That's obviously mapping closely the demographics of the country as a whole. So it's obvious there's going to be increased importance and clout from the Latino vote. But in the presidential college, the Latino vote is critical to states that used to be blue or at least purple and now really lean red, like Florida, for example, and also critical to states that have recently turned from purple to more leaning blue, like Colorado and Virginia, not to mention the classic swing states in the so-called blue wall, or used to be the blue wall, of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Okay. Now, we have two amazing guests tonight to look at this around this election and also give us a little bit of a historical sense. And I gave them, as we always do, free rein to say the tough stuff. You're going to hear, I think, some surprising stuff here that you won't necessarily get on CNN or Fox. Ambassador Gabriel Guerra. I've wanted to have Ambassador Guerra on the program for a long time. I'm blessed to call him a friend. He was ambassador of the United States to Chile under President Bill Clinton from 1994 to 1998. He entered the Foreign Service in 1976. He's worked for, I don't want to get it wrong, 7 or 8 presidents in different capacities. He's worked with every nominee for president for the Democratic Party since 1972, George McGovern. That's something he shares with the other guests I'm going to introduce in a moment. Ambassador Guerra has always been a kind of voice in the wilderness. He's willing to tell the tough stuff. Not to go down the rabbit hole too much, but if those of you who know a little bit about Latin American history, when he was ambassador to Chile, he called out the Pinochet, former Pinochet regime for its unconstitutional actions and caused a lot of waves, both in Chile in particular and in the Foreign Service community in general. He always tells it like it is. Ambassador Guerra is a graduate of Fordham. He's also a graduate of a number of other programs. I don't want to get this wrong. Oh, of course, the School of Advanced Studies at Johns Hopkins. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's been appointed to various commissions by various U.S. presidents, including recently by President Barack Obama, to the William Fulbright Foundation. He's currently in the private sector, kind of. He's still called on by leaders and heads of state in North and South America, but he now runs Guerra Associates, which is a consulting and lobbying firm based out of D.C., and his homeland of Puerto Rico, which is where he's calling in from tonight. Ambassador Guerra, welcome to Equal Footing.
Dolph, for me, I'm very pleased to be in your program. And thank you for that introduction.
I can't wait to ask you some of these burning questions. And you are paired with somebody I've known for longer than you, and you and I have known each other for going on 20 years, and that is Dr. Luis Orlando Izaza. Why? He's my dad. This is also a long time coming. I tried to convince him to be on the program before. He's got an incredible intellect, but also very humble. So doesn't want to comment unless it's really right in his strike zone, and tonight's topic is right in his strike zone. My father has been a professor of sociology, political sociology, and social work at Brandeis University, at Springfield College, at Elms College, at Smith College. He's lectured at other institutions as well. He's really a scholar of the U.S. immigrant experience and the Latino immigrant experience particularly. He's been appointed to positions of public service by former presidential candidate and governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis. He's been a public servant his entire life, and he's a naturalized American citizen. And, as I said at the outset, he's also worked on every Democratic presidential campaign since 1972. Welcome to the program.
Oh, well, I'm here. So I don't know if I have any questions.
Well, we've got Ambassador Guerra. I'm not sure that we've got Professor Izaza on. Ambassador Guerra, I was going to start with... okay, I think we've got both of you. Ambassador Guerra, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask both of you to speak up loudly when you're talking into the phone because of some of the audio difficulty here. I'm not in studio at the moment. So, Ambassador Guerra, first of all, what was gotten so wrong? And I particularly wanted two folks on who have historically worked with the Democratic Party because the Latino vote has always been considered a core vote for the Democrats, as has the black vote. But it is clearly statistically slipping away, and the estimates were completely wrong. High level, what was gotten wrong?
Well, I think this is a problem that the Democratic Party has been having for a very long time. I was the first Latino Spanish coordinator in 1972 when the three large groups in the U.S., Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, and Puerto Ricans, and they hardly knew each other. And we met in Washington, D.C. for the first time. And it turned out to be a brawl. Started fighting and throwing chairs. So that was the beginning of trying to get the Latino community together, even though each one has different interests and priorities. Obviously, the Mexican Americans, their issue principally is the issue of immigration and its closeness to Mexico. The Cuban Americans always are from a point of view of the exiles and obviously very anti-Fidel Castro and his regime. And Puerto Ricans, in essence, have always been interested in the status of whether Puerto Rico should be a state or independent or remain as it is. Right now, it's unfortunate, but the statistics do speak out, as Dobbs has spoken. And we have seen a drain of Democrats of Latino heritage moving to the Republican Party. And in many respects, I blame the actual Democratic Party and its nominees because they only pay attention to Latinos at the very end when they know that elections are coming. So during those 4 years in between elections, there's never been any real effort nationwide to continue to be of interest to Latino communities. And that's always been one of our fights with the party because even though there has been was at one point an increasing number of Latinos, especially during the Clinton and Obama years, but after George Bush started being Texan, he started to pay attention to Latinos, and then ever since,
I want to take a pause there for a second, Ambassador, because I want to talk about the issues that are important to Latino voters, and I think you're right. It's been either misapprehended or purposely ignored, a lot of those issues for many years by the Democratic Party. But first, I want to take a step back and kind of get at the assumption. And Professor Isasa, I'm going to ask you on this. Do you think it's even useful to call this a voting bloc? When we speak about the Latino vote, Ambassador Guerra just clearly identified the Mexicans, the Puerto Ricans, the Cubans, other immigrants, the Colombians, et cetera, they live in different parts of the country often. They have different issues that motivate them in voting, sometimes dramatically different issues. Do you think it's useful sociologically, demographically, to even be talking about this as a voting bloc?
Well, I don't know about a bloc because it's really, as you imply, not a monolithic.
And Dr. Isasa, I'm going to ask you to speak, if you can speak closer to the phone, speak louder. We're having difficulty hearing you.
Closer to the phone like this?
Yeah, that's better.
This is better?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So, yeah, it's a population with obviously a lot of variation in terms of national origin, like Mexican Americans and Cuban Americans and Puerto Ricans. And there are many, there are others, of course. So, however, I think it is important to look at it as a voting bloc because it has enormous potential power. So, like now, as you indicated before, it is a thriving the largest minority population in the United States, and increasing in numbers and voters. For example, in this particular presidential election, there was a record actually of Latino voting people who were registered to vote. And 1 of 5 was a youngster, I think 18 to 39, or maybe, I have to look at the specifics. So we know, for example, in this particular election, and let me just say that I was, as a Latino sociologist and who has been an avid follower of political events in this country for decades and decades, I just didn't expect the results. I was astounded. I was astonished to find the results, and certainly I couldn't understand what had happened. Even on the evening of the 5th, the talking heads were already talking about this major increase in the Latino male, particularly voting for Trump. The initial data came out of the traditional exit polls. they are right unreliable and not terribly valid because the sampling for Latinos in the exit polls are very low grade. So there is little reliability and validity in those early findings. In those early findings, we were told that there was, and I think you already cited the number 43. Others have said 46 for the Latino vote for Trump. It turns out that it's much lower than that. It's significantly lower than that. The initial poll exit analysis, again, show a distance, a margin, pro-Trump of 14 points. Is really not that bad as it is.
Well, let me stop you there for a moment and go back to you, Ambassador Guerra, because even if the numbers are drifting up as the count comes in, and Professor Isasa is right. I mean, the numbers have moved over the last couple of weeks as counts have come in from late counting precincts in California or slow counting precincts and placed a lot of Latinos. It has compressed some. I think I gave the most recent number that I've seen reported. But even if it's 45, 46%, it's a dramatic.
It's actually 37.
Okay, well, I'll come back to that because I'll try. Maybe during the break we'll try to get the citation I was referring to. But I wanted to talk about the gender difference because even at lower numbers, you are seeing a similar gender breakout for meaning a 10-15% difference between men and women, men voting more for Trump and women voting less across all the ethnic groups. It's in the same range for white voters, black voters, Latino voters, and Asian voters. So one of the things that I'm wondering here, Ambassador Guerra, are we asking the wrong questions? I just see so much chatter about Latino men, as if Latino men did something that was really different than white men or really different than Asian men. And in fact, they didn't. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, they voted more for Trump basically in the same, roughly the same type of margin that every other ethnic group did. So why are we focusing so much on Latino men, Ambassador?
Well, I really don't know why, because it should not be like that. I have to exclude, obviously, the black men because they stay more or less the same. I think that Latinos in general go hand in hand with the majority of the population of men in general. And I think that the issue that Vice President Harris was a woman and also a black woman did not help, because I think that was an element that hurt her in the campaign, even though a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But I think that there's sub-ground or underground element of both racism and against women that definitely came up in almost all statistics. And I think that, unfortunately, the American people in general, including Latinos, they're not particularly still are ready to have first of all, a woman, and even less if it happens to be, in this case, a black woman.
Yeah, I do want to talk about it. I couldn't agree more. And after the break, I want to ask you that direct question, both of you. The stats do seem to show that Latinos are, I shouldn't say the stats. There has been sociological commentary around the results there's a consensus building. I happen to agree with it, unfortunately, that the Latino community there are racist and sexist underpinnings to the vote that are pretty similar, unfortunately, to the white community as it pertains to a Jamaican Indian woman running for president. Now, I'm not saying that's why people voted. I'm saying that the undercurrent seems to be pretty similar. And I think we've made an assumption for a long time that brown people are less likely to be racist. And I don't think when it comes to the Latino community, unfortunately, that that's true. And I say that as a Latino myself. We are here with Ambassador Gabriel Guerra Mondragon, Professor Dr. Luis Orlando Izaza. We're talking about the Latino vote. And I want both of you to give us your unvarnished view on that question on racism and sexism within the Latino community after the break. Participate live. The number to call is 718-303-9090. That's 718-303-9090. Please be patient. We'll get to you eventually. And then you can also text or WhatsApp in a question or comment. It's a different number. Please don't call this number for iMessage or WhatsApp, 917-428-4062. That's 917-428-4062. And we'll be right back.
Por la noche los caminos, como las hojas al viento, como el sol espanta el frío, como la tierra la lluvia, como el mar espera el río, así espero tu regreso a la tierra del olvido.
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You could even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on.
Hey, this is Dove Tusman. You're back. I'm in studio and breathless because Park ran in. Wow. Okay. Professor Izaza, what do you think about my assertion that racism and sexism played a role here in the Latino vote?
Well, let me just make a couple of comments. There was the initial exit poll analysis showed a picture that is not as accurate as it was found to be by a coalition of research organizations in the Latino community published on the 12th of November. On the 12th of November, the distance was 62 to 37. 37, for Trump versus what was said before, which was 43 and 46. So the distance is not as great as it appeared to be. It is true that there is a movement into the Republican, the GOP. In terms of the Latino male, we're talking basically the ones who really embraced Trump by 48% were the young people between 18 and 39. That really was the dominant group in the Latino community. Now, that could have many explanations. I mean, obviously, we know of that range that those relatively young people were very concerned about the international and the war situation in Gaza. And the response of the administration has been very appropriate and very well liked. So I don't know enough about what has happened here. What I want to say in summary is that what this report of November 12 indicates is that what they call a dissonance between policy and candidate choice. In fact, what they found is a very high, in the 90% coincidence with the Harris's positions.
Yeah, I think
it's very well focused, very carefully crafted, actually going beyond the policies stated by Vice President Harris.
Yeah, I don't want to gloss that over. I think that's policy. Sorry, Professor Isasa. That's an interesting topic I want to address in a moment. Is how the policy mapping looks for the interests of the community, or something that Ambassador Guerra said before the break. I am going to say, guys, if you don't mind, just to be careful with your mics. If when you're not talking, if you want to put it on mute, that'd be great. We're getting a lot of feedback. But it's interesting. Over the break, Professor Isasa, we did have a chance to look at the data that you're quoting, and it was from a lobbying group called Unidos US. It is showing 62% voted for Latino vote for Harris. I will say that's a pretty dramatic outlier. There are a number of other polls that are showing that they're pretty different. That being said,
in response to that, this was a very carefully crafted representative samples in 10 states, including all the battleground swing states, with a very high level of reliability, 1.9% margin of error.
Right. I will though just say that even the polling organization that put it out did say that it was a large oversample of Puerto Rican voters. I just want to be clear. So in their press release itself, they did say that that of the 3,750 Hispanic voters that were polled, 800 were Puerto Rican, which is a significant overpoll of that community. But I want to go back to the issue of racism and sexism. Ambassador Guerra, it's no surprise. I mean, Michael Che on Saturday Night Live, I thought, had a really great joke about this the Saturday after the election. He's a black man. He's one of the announcers for their satirical news program, and he said, I can't believe the white liberals I live with in New York convinced me that the Indian Jamaican lady was going to win, and obviously he said it with the satire and sadness there. But do you think the Latino community is less racist and less sexist than the white community in the U.S., or you think it's similar across the board, Ambassador?
I think it varies. I think with the Puerto Rican community, because it's racially mixed, I think that is a difference from the Mexican Americans, which is the largest group, where the majority is they're really mixed, but with the majority being mixed, but being both Indian or I don't know how you want to call them, natives and whites. I think also you have to make the big difference is, of course, Texas and California, where the most number of Mexican Americans, and it also depends on when they came or into the U.S. And I think that an issue that is still unclear to me, and I think to the majority of people, is of the young people as to where they stood with the Latinos, especially with the Mexican Americans. I think it's too early to know exactly where they stood, but no doubt that, first of all, the young community of voters usually tend to be low. I still believe, unfortunately, that the importance given by the Republican Party to the Latinos, especially in Texas and other areas of the so-called important 8 states. And I think that if you look at Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, you have a majority of mix of the two. I exclude the Cubans because the Cuban American community in general always tends to vote Republican, irrespective of whether they happen to be white or black or mixed or whatever, because of the issue of Cuba. So I think one really has to look at the Mexican American community first, because they're the largest, and second, the Puerto Ricans, because they have increasingly becoming more important in states like Florida, in Orlando, where there's now a substantial amount of Puerto Ricans. So I think it's too early to know exactly how this is going to break down. But I still believe that, in general, the Democratic Party, as it shows in the polls, the issue of immigration and the issue of inflation were very important. And that hit the Latino community as it hit every other group. And I think that's reflected in the opinion at the end, because also many Democrats failed to vote. And I think that that's another issue that we have to look at as to why such a high percentage of Democrats decided not to vote and Republicans did.
Professor Isasa, on that point, immigration. I mean, this was obviously a center point to the Trump campaign and was considered an Achilles heel in the Harris campaign. Carlos Trujillo, who has been a Trump surrogate for a while, I'm sure, Ambassador Guerra, you've come across him in your life. He was U.S. permanent representative to the Organization of American States for a period of time and a long-term foreign service official. He the other day had an opinion piece where he said that the Democratic Party fundamentally misunderstood the way that a lot of Latino immigrants, particularly Mexican Americans, look at immigration. The idea that many have gone through a multi-year process. Obviously, if they're voting, they're either naturalized or they're born in the U.S. And he cited a stat that I hadn't heard before, which is that 80% of Latino voters in the United States are either naturalized in their lifetime, the children of people that were naturalized, or Puerto Rican, which means that the Latino vote is overwhelmingly proximate to legal immigration, or in the case of Puerto Rico, migration to a place in the U.S. where they would participate in the Electoral College. Now, the assumption the Democratic Party's had for a long time is that means there's tremendous sympathy for immigrants that are here illegally. That being said, what Carlos Trujillo was saying is the opposite, that Latinos who are proximate to immigration in their lives personally and are voting feel, hey, we went through this long process, a difficult road to get naturalized, for my parents to get naturalized, and now there are folks that are coming in behind us, so to speak, that didn't do it the right way. Professor Isasa, what do you think? Does this resonate with you as a scholar of the U.S. immigrant experience, particularly the Latino immigrant experience? Is Carlos Trujillo right?
I think the general response is, and again, what was found in this particular study that I cited before. I'm sorry, could you just repeat your question?
Sure, yeah, I know we had an audio issue there. Do you think Carlos Trujillo is right that the Latino immigrant, to some extent when they're voting, feels, hey, I came in the right way, and I don't want the border to be open to people that are coming in the wrong way, so to speak?
Yeah, that actually has been documented. There is more of a sense of we are here for a rather good, kind of support of those who are already here, but those who enter need to enter legally. So there is a great deal of empathy, let's say, for the undocumented population, and a call for protection for their rights. And essentially, this particular study found that they also agree that the bill that was proposed and then signed by Trump for the border, that they agree with that particular way of dealing with the border situation.
So you
but
basically
I think part of what happened.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think a lot of really what hasn't been talked about is how, if there was such coincidence with the Democratic policies, how do you explain the dissonance of voting for Trump? I think that's the important point, and racism has been raised by many people, including tonight, and I agree with it. But I think it's a very interesting situation. It's really why, and I have some opinions about that. Why, with that affinity with the policies of Vice President Harris, they moved into Trump, and that's I mean, to me, the kind of messaging of hatred, of division, of othering, of dehumanizing, the immigrants and so on and so forth. To speak about immigrants as vermin and 600,000 convicted criminals, and that of course has been disputed.
Well, so
that
Ambassador Guerra,
in the population, I think move people in the direction to go with Trump. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Do you agree with Professor Isasa that the Latino immigrant who's very proximate to the naturalization process, either in their own lives or their parents' lives, for the most part, are very sympathetic to the current undocumented immigrant community? Or do you agree with Carlos Trujillo that, in fact, they're very unsympathetic to that community, and there's a kind of a policy disagreement there?
Well, I think that it's still, again, as I said, we're still early to know statistics, but I would look at the South Texas, which I will is going to be a good barometer as to why so many Mexican Americans of that region, especially close to the border, what was the impact on them concerning undocumented as related to those that already were here. And I think an additional issue, of course, was the huge amount of Venezuelans who came in and were given preference by the Biden administration, including other countries, but Venezuela being the most important one. So I think that there was an element of, one, the Democratic Party not necessarily ever being totally attuned or careful of how to deal with the Latinos generally, and specifically during the election. And second, that the longer the Mexican-American community remains in the U.S. and have lived in the U.S., they tend to have that fear that the immigrants are taking their jobs. And I think that was an important element. So it concerns both politics, and attention by the Republican Party smartly moving in that direction, especially in South Texas, which they did a very good job in trying to influence their vote.
We're going to be right back. We're here with Professor Luis Orlando Isasa, as a professor of sociology and looks particularly at the U.S. immigrant experience. We're here with Ambassador Gabriel Guerra Mondragon. He was formerly ambassador of the U.S. to Chile. He's been a foreign service official for decades and worked with both of the gentlemen on tonight have worked with multiple U.S. presidential candidates and nominees over the decades. Interesting discussion about the Latino vote. What did we get wrong? When I say we, everybody, really. Not even the Republicans in their wildest dreams thought that they would get the numbers they got. Even if, by the way, Professor Isasa is the study that he cited, the Unidos U.S. study that came out, I think, yesterday. Even if that was right, you still got this ongoing drift of the Latino vote to the GOP. We'll be right back on Equal Footing.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws.
That was a shout out to both of you. I know you're both political activists in the 70s. We always program our music to the to the topic. And in this case, shout out to our guests. So here at Equal Footing, we're in our 5th year. And we've been trying to change things up so we're not solely dependent on commercial sponsorship. We love our loyal commercial sponsors, but we want you as our audience to get involved so we can continue to bring tough radio, ask the tough questions that often don't get asked on a Jewish network. We're a Jewish show, but trying to look at things often from a broader lens and angle and bring in voices that we don't always hear from in the bubble that we sometimes live in. How can you help us to continue to be on the air? Go to Patreon. You can go to patreon.com. That's Patreon, or you can go to the Patreon app on your iOS or Android device and put in Equal Footing with Dove Tusman, or search just Equal Footing if you can't remember that, and become a subscriber. There's several different levels, including VIP membership, where we give behind the scenes content. And we did a really cool interview last week with Rabbi Stephen Barr, stuff that was even maybe I wouldn't have felt comfortable asking on the air. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can see that special subscriber-only content. So check out Equal Footing by Dove Tusman on Patreon. Help us out.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been told.
We have some great questions from our listeners, and a couple of them go right to the content at hand better than I would say it. And one listener says, Dove, you finally have put on a program that I find interesting. I'm also a Latino Jew. I'm not observant. I live in Manhattan, not Brooklyn. By the way, there are plenty of observant Jews in Manhattan, nameless listener. But he goes on to say, this is not a very difficult thing to sort out. Latino voters vote just like white voters do. And I think he goes on, but there's an interesting point there. The numbers actually are not that dissimilar, as I said, the delta on gender. The overall numbers, as Professor Isasa pointed out, were significantly different, meaning white voters voted much more for Trump than Latino voters. But in terms of the difference between the age groups, the difference between gender, difference in region and so forth, maps pretty closely. And this goes to the question that one of the questions I started the program with, which is, are we thinking about the Latino vote in the right way? And as a Latino, I don't think we are. I think the Puerto Rican community aside, I think most Latinos in the U.S. almost don't necessarily like to be thought of as part of an ethnic minority. We come here to make a better life in most cases, or our parents have. And there's a lot of, I think, desire for assimilation politically and policy-wise. Ambassador Guerra, what do you think of this listener's comment?
Well, I think there's an element of truth to that, especially within the Mexican-American community. And the longer they're here, the more I think that's true. But I don't want to give, even though I believe that's true, but I think it goes further than that when it comes to politics. And I think that the Democratic Party really has to start looking at itself as to why this happened. Because attention has always placed to Latinos when the vote comes in presidential elections. And I have been involved in many presidential elections in my life, and there's always been fighting to try and get more Latinos involved within the campaign and having more money spent within the Latino community. It has improved dramatically in many respects, but still, there's always been a fight within, internally. And I include myself all the way to the last election where I was involved, which was with respect to the last election of Secretary Clinton. I was not involved in President Biden's campaign because I'm already here in Puerto Rico. But this fight we have been having from day one back to 1972. And I think the Democratic Party has hopefully been a wake-up call, especially when it came to what happened in South Texas, which was really surprising to have an area that was immensely in favor of Democrats. And something I think dramatically occurred. I think in some respects, the Democratic Party in general and locally has to be accounted for their lack of attention when it comes to long range and not just when it comes to voting on presidential elections.
Yeah. Professor Isasa, there's a listener, Yehuda, who has a question or comment directed at you. He says, as I listened to Dr. Isasa speak, it feels a lot like what we're looking at when it comes to the Jewish American vote. Instead of looking at why we are losing Jewish Americans to the Republican Party, we're focused on why the numbers are wrong, why, in fact, we didn't lose the vote. If we focus on why the numbers are wrong, we won't actually learn anything. We won't actually improve. Assuming that Professor Isasa is a Democratic Party activist, as I am, then he would want to pay attention to those numbers very closely and correct our faults. What do you think of Yehuda's comment?
Well, I am kind of trying to, maybe what would be helpful would be to give what again was found to be the 5 most critical priorities for the Latino voters in the recent elections. 5 of the 5 major priorities for voting, 4 have to do with issues of income and poverty. Number 1, cost of living, 52%. Number 2, jobs and the economy, 36%. However, those two are defined. Number 3, housing cost and affordability, 27%. Number 4, healthcare costs, 25%. Number 5, abortion and reproductive rights. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're all saying that this is, I mean, these were the issues that dominated these recent elections for just actually a large majority of Americans.
Yeah. I think that the same could be said, for example, of the rural white vote, that there's an argument to be made. There's a guest on this program a couple of weeks ago who effectively made the argument that while that vote has moved solidly Republican and even more solidly Trump, in many sense votes against its own interests when it comes to poverty reduction and taxes and so forth. But that doesn't change the political question around messaging. Now, here's another listener, meaning there's something's going wrong as it pertains to the Democratic Party's messaging on these issues at the very least. Here, Rogelio is a listener who says, I am listening to this program for the first time. One of your guests told me that they were going to be on. I'm enjoying it. However, I think you're dancing around the issue on racism. I don't think there's any question. I'm Ecuadorian. Racism is rampant. With the issue in Ecuador, and I think a number of other Latin American countries, is that we don't actually have a healthy dialogue on the issue. It's assumed that you're racist, and sexism, although I would put it in second place, frankly, is also assumed. It's just not part of our conscious dialogue. I agree, Refugio. I think the sad reality, and I hope I don't get hate mail from this, I say this as a Latino, I think that Latinos tend to be, as it pertains to certainly to the black community, and unfortunately, both are unfortunate, and also, I should say, as it pertains to the Latino community, tends to be quite racist about darker skin, and there is pervasive sexism, I think as much or more as in any other segment of American society. Ambassador Guerra, respond to Rogelio.
Well, I think there's an element, as I said from the very beginning. There's always the underground issue that a lot of people don't want to talk about, which is racism and sexism. And I think that, unfortunately, Latinos in general have always been, not just in the U.S., but I mean, throughout the continent, there's always been a major problem with machismo on the one hand, and also the lack of respect by many men that have about women. We have a lot of issues concerning, abuses on women all over Latin America, and also the issue of racism always there. No, not too many Latins want to talk about it, but the color of your skin is very important in many countries in Latin America. Yeah. And that's reflected in the U.S. as well.
I will say, and sorry for the interruption, Professor Isasa, correct me if I'm wrong in this. My understanding is there have been sociological studies around representation by skin color in positions of power in government and business in Latin American countries, and in fact, it's even worse, a lower prorated representation than in the United States. So I think you can make an argument that racism is even a bigger problem in Latin America than in the U.S.
And I would agree, but it's less surface.
Right.
It's more kind of underground. People don't question it too much. But
I think that's part of what Rogelio is saying, is that we don't even talk about it.
I agree entirely with everything that has been said. A recent journalist, what's her name, Paola Ramos, who studied this whole issue, concluded the other day saying something like, for the Latino voted in this presidential election, it was economic interest, as we just saw, or stated, and intertwined, laced with all kinds of phobias, including racism, homophobia, just name all the isms, including racism. And so, yes, I'm in full agreement with that, and that has been established in the academic world for a long time.
Well, we're going to take our last.
It's probably, and it's in my opinion, it's probably worse than it is in the North, because in North America, at least there is a kind of a more of an awareness of that as an issue. Although God knows with the results of the elections, and I think where we're going to end up.
That point will surprise a lot of non-Latino listeners. We're going to have to take a quick last break. We'll be right back and finish up here with Ambassador Gabriel Guerra and Professor Luis Orlando Isasa.
Perdido en el corazón de la grande Babilón, me dicen el clandestino por no llevar papel pa' una ciudad del norte.
Equal Footing has been supported for years by Mechanical Art Capital. I don't have to say much about Mechanical Art Capital. It's because it's very simple. Mechanical Art Capital gives you money if you are a watch dealer or a watch collector for your collection or your inventory at very reasonable rates. It's halachically sound. It's not a loan. It's an inventory buyback program. You can get the money overnight. Here's how. Go to mechanicalartcapital.com. That's 3 words. Mechanical Art Capital. Or you can go to your iPhone or your Android device, go to the App Store and put in 3 words separated by spaces, Mechanical Art Capital, and you just upload a couple of photos or videos of your watches. You get an indicative offer within hours, and you can have money in your pocket as early as the next day. So unleash the cash value of your collection or inventory of watches. Mechanical Art Capital.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. I've been told.
So, now I get to pivot a little bit, and to listeners that have sent in questions that we're not going to get to, I apologize. Maybe I'll try to get to one other, but I want to take advantage of having the both of you on who are, in one case, my father, been a teacher my whole life, obviously, Ambassador Guerra. You've been a mentor for a long time as well. And I want to ask you a couple of questions around how you personally feel right now. If you let your guard down and maybe pretend no one's listening. I know you have both spent decades. And often on the show, we'll try to get people from different political points of view. But tonight, I felt it was interesting to get 2 people that have been activists in the Democratic Party for decades. And tell us how you're feeling right now, given that you both worked at the nexus of the Latino community in the Democratic Party since the early 1970s. You've dedicated, I would argue, a significant part of your life to this. I hope I'm not revealing. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Guerra. I hope I don't reveal anything uncomfortable. We only have a couple minutes left. Just when we were pre-gaming this afternoon, you said you think the next couple of years are going to be entertaining, and I love that. It didn't feel like you were kind of, crying into your beer. How are you feeling right now?
Well, I'm still getting out of my depression, but there's nothing I can do about it, so I might as well take it, look at it, and see what Trump has said. I think that one of the things that he has going for him is that what he thinks he says. So and he'll do it this time because he has the power. And it's going to be a mess the next 2 years. We'll have to see what happens, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. And I hope that within 2 years, they finally, the Americans that voted for him, see what a dangerous man he is, and what a mess he's going to be. And then hopefully in 2 years, we get our act together, and we get the Senate and the House back under Democratic control.
One of the things I don't mean to contradict you. I just want to say that one of the things I think that's beautiful in our Jewish faith that we do is even when we lose, when it comes to an election, we do pray for and hope for the best outcome for our elected leader. And I just want to put that in, that whether or not you voted for Trump, however you're feeling right now, I hope that these next years are much better than those who hope for good things, much even better, only revealed blessings. And for those that are really scared about bad things going to happen, I hope your fears do not come true. So I just want to give a little blessing around that. Dad, how are you feeling right now?
Well, I mean, again, I kind of mentioned it before. Depression is a close diagnosis. Certainly a lot of disappointment and almost shame about who we are at this point as a nation. But I must say, as your grandmother used to tell me all the time, hijo, mijo, lo último que se pierde es la esperanza. My child, the last thing you lose is hope. So I remain hopeful, but fearful.
That's beautiful and in blessed memory. I remember her saying that. I do want to just add one. I don't think we're going to have time to take the caller that's been waiting so patiently. I'm very sorry. But one last listener comment who has brought up the issue that we didn't touch on. This is Ellie from Brooklyn, who says, we didn't do a lot of crossover tonight on the Jewish vote and the Latino vote. But one thing I would say that I found very interesting is seeing that although there was a lot of talk, particularly in the Puerto Rican community, around the situation in Gaza, the exit polls that I've seen show that the Latino community has a very strong support for Israel, not that dissimilar than the overall Jewish vote as it pertains to the exit poll results. And I've seen similar stuff, Ellie. I think that's interesting, not always talked about. You see more talk about the differences and the similarities on that point. Ambassador Guerra, I'll give you the closing word here. We have about 30 seconds.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being in your program for the first time. I hope the best for you and your father and all the listeners. And I'm a strong supporter of the Israeli state, and I do hope that something finally occurs to bring peace to that part of the world.
Amen. Thank you to both of you to be on. It was a real pleasure, a dream come true for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you. Thank you.